The kind of town where everybody knows what kind of car you drive, what time you leave for work, and whether or not you shoveled your walk before 7 in the morning. Cobden, Ontario. Population just under 3,000, give or take whoever moved away that year. I grew up there, raised my kids there, buried my wife there, and for the last 11 years, I've been living alone in the same house on Maple Ridge Road, the one with the green shutters that need repainting and a porch light that flickers when it's cold. I'm 63 now. Retired 2 years ago from 31 years at the credit union. Assistant manager, then branch manager, then the kind of person who just made sure everything ran quietly and nobody had to panic. I'm not flashy, never was. My truck is a 2017 F-150 with a dent above the rear wheel well that I keep meaning to fix. I cut my own grass. I make my own coffee. I go to the hockey game on Friday nights if the Cobden Stokers are home, sit in the same spot, third row behind the penalty box, same as I have since the mid-90s. I have a daughter. Her name is Leigh. She's 34, lives in Ottawa now, works into communications for the federal government. She's sharp, funny, can argue a position until you forget what side you were originally on. I'm proud of her every single day. I don't say it enough. That's my fault. And I have a son. His name is Derek. No, wait. I need to stop and tell you something first, because if I say his name before you understand who he is, you'll form the wrong picture. My son is 57 years old. Not my biological son. He was my wife Carolyn's boy from before we met. I adopted him formally when he was 9. His name is Martin. I raised him the same as Leigh. Same rules, same roof, same expectations. If anything, I was softer on him in the early years because I wanted him to know this was his home, not a temporary arrangement. Carolyn and I were careful about that. Equal. Always. Martin turned out to be someone who wanted more than he was willing to earn. That's the simplest way I can put it. He's charming the way some people are charming. It's useful to them. It gets them things. But you start to notice after a while that the charm is always pointed toward an outcome. He married well, in his opinion. His wife Denise has family money from somewhere in northern Alberta, oil something, and they live in a house in Canada that's too big for 2 people and has a theater room that nobody uses. He works in sales, has for 30 years, different companies, different products, same Martin. Growing up, Martin had a gift for finding the thing that would make you feel slightly smaller without you being able to say exactly why. Not cruel. Never raised his voice. Just precise. The right comment, the right moment. He knew where the soft spots were. Christmas 2019 was the last time I really felt it. We were at Leigh's apartment in Ottawa. Small place, second floor of an older building on Elgin Street, but she'd made it warm. Good food, music, lights strung along the bookshelf the way she does. Martin and Denise drove in from Canada. It was the first time in 2 years we'd all been in the same room. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, Martin asked me what I'd been up to. Normal question. I told him I'd been thinking about retirement, maybe another year or 2, thinking about just doing some traveling, maybe seeing the East Coast properly, Cape Breton, the Cabot Trail. He smiled, put his fork down. The Cabot Trail, he said. That's a nice little trip. Good for you, Dad. I didn't say anything. I just mean, it's a good pace for where you're at, not too ambitious. Leigh looked at her plate. Martin, Denise said quietly. What? I'm agreeing with him. The Cabot Trail is beautiful. I'm being sincere. He was. That was the thing. He was always technically sincere. You could never quite hold the thing in your hands. Later that night, after they'd gone, Leigh and I washed up together, and she said, without looking at me, he doesn't mean it the way it sounds. I know, I said. Do you? I dried a bowl and didn't answer. There were other moments over the years. The retirement party at the credit union. Martin came, gave a speech, said I'd had a solid, steady career, that I was the kind of man who showed up every day, that Cobden was lucky to have him. All true, all somehow diminishing. The kind of eulogy you'd give someone who never did anything remarkable. The time he mentioned, in front of 3 other people at a family birthday, that I was still in the same house, the way you'd say someone was still wearing the same shoes from 20 years ago. The time he asked Leigh, while I was standing right there, whether I'd thought about what comes next, as if 63 was a terminal diagnosis. I didn't fight back. Never have been a person who fights back in the moment. I'm slower than that. I sit with things, turn them over. I learned a long time ago that reacting isn't the same as responding, and I'd rather wait until I'm sure of what I actually want to say. The winter Martin's company started struggling. I heard about it from Leigh first. She called me on a Tuesday in February. Cold day, -22 with the wind, the kind of cold that makes the windows creak. I was making soup, split pea with ham, the recipe Carolyn used to make every winter, the one I finally wrote down after she passed because I was terrified I'd forget it. Martin called me, Lee said. He said the company's in trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where he needs money. I turned the heat down on the burner. How much? She hesitated. He didn't say a specific number to me, but he's asking if there's any way you'd be willing to help. I asked her what she thought. I think, she said carefully, that it's your money and your decision. But I also think you should have all the information before you say anything either way. I said I'd wait to hear from him directly. He called the following Sunday. Midday, which surprised me. Martin is not a phone call person. He communicates by text the way people of his generation do, brief and emoji forward. But he called, and his voice was different. The precision was still there, but the confidence underneath it had slipped a few degrees. The company he'd been managing sales for had lost 2 major contracts in the same quarter. There were cash flow problems. The owner was restructuring. Martin had invested some of his own money in the company, tied up in some kind of partnership arrangement I didn't fully understand. And now that was frozen. He and Denise had expenses. The house, obviously. A vehicle lease. The kids at private school in Ottawa. And Denise's family money, it turned out, was not as accessible as it had once seemed, some kind of trust arrangement with conditions. He needed $85,000. He said it plainly, professionally, the way he'd present a sales pitch. Terms. Timeline. He said he'd repay it within 18 months. He said he could put it in writing. I listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When he finished, there was a long pause. Can I have a few days to think? I said. Another pause on his end. Of course, I'll call you by Thursday, sure. And Dad, I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't necessary. I know, I said. I sat with it for 4 days, made more soup, went for long walks on the county road past the old Kavanagh farm, the bare trees and frozen fields, the sky that particular flat gray that only February in eastern Ontario can produce. I thought about all of it, not just the money, but the history. Not to punish him with it, not to use it as ammunition, but because it was part of the full picture, and I was a man who liked the full picture before he made a decision. I thought about what I actually had. The house was paid off, had been for 6 years. I had my pension from the credit union, a good one, decades of contributions indexed. I had my RRSPs, converted to a RRIF when I retired, and a modest investment portfolio that my financial advisor, a quiet woman in Pembroke named Louise who had been managing my money for 15 years, kept in good shape. I was not a wealthy man by the standards Martin and Denise used to measure things, but I was comfortable, more comfortable than anyone who'd said solid, steady career might have assumed. I called Martin on Thursday afternoon. I'm going to help you, I said. But I want to be honest with you about how I'm going to do it. Okay, he said. I'm not giving you 85,000. I'm going to give you 50. That's what I'm comfortable with, and that's what I've decided. But I want something in return, a repayment schedule. Not just that, I said. I want to have a real conversation, not about the money. About some things that have been sitting with me for a while. Silence. Martin, I've been your father for 48 years. I adopted you legally. I loved your mother. And I love you, and I always have. But I need to say something to you that I should have said a long time ago. He didn't speak. The way you talk to me sometimes, the little comments, the suggestions that my life is small or my choices aren't ambitious enough. I've let those go for years, and I'm not angry about them. But I'm 63 years old, and I'm not going to let them go anymore. Not because I want to fight you, but because I think you deserve to know the truth about what I've been building while you thought I was just coasting. Another silence. Longer this time. What do you mean? He said, and I told him. I told him about the property in Prince Edward County. Carolyn and I had bought 12 acres outside of Bloomfield in 2001. Nobody knew. It wasn't a secret in the dramatic sense. We simply didn't discuss our finances with family, never had, and nobody asked in a way that expected an actual answer. We'd driven out there on a long weekend, seen the land, the limestone outcroppings, and the old orchard that had gone to seed, the way the light came through the trees in late afternoon. And we bought it because it was beautiful and we could, and because someday we thought we'd build something there. Carolyn died in 2013 before we got the chance. I kept the land. I thought about selling it many times. Instead, over the years, I had a small renovation done on the old drive shed at the back of the property, converted it into a proper guest cottage, insulated, heated, a wood stove, a small kitchen. Nothing elaborate. I rented it out starting in 2018, seasonal at first, then year-round once I finished the insulation properly. P had become a destination by then. Wineries, restaurants, the kind of place Toronto people drove 3 hours to spend a weekend. The cottage booked solid from Victoria Day to Thanksgiving, and decent on winter weekends too, people coming for the quietness of it. I also told him about the small rental property in Renfrew, a duplex I'd bought quietly in 2015 when the market was still sensible, that I'd rented steadily since then to a retired teacher on the main floor and a young family on the second. Not glamorous, but it paid itself and then some. Martin listened without interrupting. That was new. I'm not telling you this to embarrass you, I said. I'm telling you because for years you've looked at my life and seen a man who didn't amount to much. A man who needed the Cabot Trail kept in the not too ambitious category. A man who still lived in the same house, like that was something to pity. And I let it sit because I didn't need you to know what I had. Your mother and I didn't feel the need to justify our choices to anyone. But now you're asking me to help you, and before I write that check, I want you to understand who you're asking. A long pause. I didn't realize, he said. I know you didn't. I'm sorry, Dad. His voice had changed again. Something had gone out of it that I couldn't quite name. Not the charm. Something harder than that. I mean it. I've been a bit of an ass. A bit, I said. He laughed. A real laugh, small and surprised. The kind that comes when something honest slips out before you can dress it up. I told him the 50,000 would be transferred to his account by the end of the week. I told him I wanted a written agreement, something simple, not because I didn't trust him, but because clarity is a kindness. I told him 18 months was fine, and I wasn't charging interest, but if he missed a payment I expected a phone call, not a silence. He agreed to all of it. Before he hung up he said, "What's the cottage like? In the county?" "Beautiful," I said, "especially in October. Maybe Denise and I could—" "One thing at a time," I said. He laughed again. "Fair enough." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a while. The soup was long gone, but the pot was still on the stove, a faint ring of split pea at the bottom that I'd have to scrub later. Outside, the light was already fading. February afternoons do that, give up early. I thought about Carolyn. Thought about how she would have handled it differently. She had a directness I've never quite matched, a way of saying difficult things without letting them become dramatic. She would have told Martin years ago. Probably over the phone, 5 minutes, done. But I wasn't Carolyn, and I'd done it in my own way, on my own timeline. That would have to be enough. Lee called that evening. "He called me," she said. "I figured he might. He said you talked. We did." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine, actually." "He sounded different," she said. "When he called. I don't know how to describe it. Quieter, maybe. Good. Dad?" "Yeah, I've known about the county property since about 2019. You left a rental agreement on the printer when I was visiting, and I saw it by accident." I didn't say anything for a second. "Did you tell him?" I asked. "No," she said. "It wasn't mine to tell. And honestly," she paused, "I was waiting to see how long it took you." I laughed. 63 years old, and my daughter is more patient than I am, I said. "I learned from someone," she said. I hung up and walked out to the porch. The temperature had dropped again, breath visible, the kind of February night where the stars are very clear and very cold, and the whole world feels like it's been held perfectly still. The porch light flickered twice. That old wiring, I keep meaning to fix it, and then held. I stood there for a while. Just stood there. There is a particular satisfaction that doesn't make any noise. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need the room to notice. It's the feeling of having done the right thing in the right order, on your own schedule, without apology. Of having held something precious and private for years, and then, when the moment came, choosing to share it, not to win, but because it was finally time. Lee texted me at 9 o'clock that night. One line. "October long weekend at the cottage?" I typed back. "Already blocked off." She sent a single emoji. I almost never use them. But I sat there and looked at it for a minute, before I set my phone face down on the kitchen table, and I thought, yes, that's exactly right.